Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to tonight's Blender Hangout stream. So we're gonna get started here in just a second. I want to welcome everyone to the live stream tonight. And so we've already got Lorian in tonight early saying thank you for replying to all my questions. And so if you were on last night, we had quite a few questions asked and answered, and so that was good. And then also a lot of questions that I missed in the guild that were being asked, and I popped back in this afternoon and started to answer those. So if you are a member of the Orange Guild, you can pop in any of the courses, you can ask specific questions in the lectures, or especially if you go to the Ask a Mentor section, then I'm available to answer any of your questions for your projects, things like that. So we can do that. So tonight we're going to jump back into working on sculpting the pipe that we started last night. So let me switch over here. Get this out of the way. Okay. So here we have our concept art in Photoshop that we were working on last night. And so I did a little bit more to kind of update this according to where the concept is at now. Some of this is still going to have to be tweaked as we go, but that's the beauty of kind of working with this workflow. We'll be able to kind of modify things and adapt. So let's get into Blender now and take a look at where we ended up last night. Okay, so you can see that I did a little bit more work this afternoon. Got the model here for the pipe stem kind of in a place that's a lot better. Just tighten things up a little bit, beveled some edges, things like that to get that looking good. We won't really have to sculpt any of that right now. We're going to focus primarily on the body of the submarine or this little vessel here. And I also went through and kind of switched up the topology on the sphere a little bit, gave it a little bit more of a nicer workflow here for these corners, so there wasn't as much pinching going on and stuff like that. Again, we'll probably end up tossing this and kind of sculpting it a little bit to get it into a better place, but this is a good starting point for now. So let's jump back into this model. And one of the things I kind of noticed as we get back into looking at this concept is that we didn't really resolve how we were going to take a look at figuring out this sphere here. So just 1 second, I have a comment. Lauren's asking to please show us the window that we're working on. Sorry about that. Thought I clicked on this setup. Okay, so now you can see my reference down here in the bottom left, and this is my right monitor, this is my left monitor, and this is my webcam. Okay, sorry about that. So let me kind of just briefly go over what I figured out today. So this is sort of filling in the half sphere that we have here, and needed to figure out how this end of the submarine was going to be kind of extruding into the sphere here a little bit, because we didn't really have a good way to handle that the way this is currently set up. So again, since I didn't have that screen showing, this is the stuff I did to the pipe today as far as the stem goes, and then fixing the sphere a little bit so it's got some better topology there. And yeah, so here's where we are. Jump into sculpt mode and keep going. And one of the things I did notice as we started talking about how we're going to transition the end of the sub here into the rest of the sphere is that I'm probably going to want to start hacking away or combining the sphere into this mesh. And I want it to sort of feel like if we were blasting our way through like the side of a mountain and we're carving away that rock or something like that. I want one side to be you know, all natural and smooth and all sorts of stuff like that. And that's the side we can't see. And on this side, we're going to have all of the rest of the raw material carved away. Okay. So that's how it's going to feel. And so we need to have a piece of this corner of the sphere right here sort of dug out as we get in here and play with those. So we'll have to figure out how we want to do that. But first thing I'm going to do is kind of break this down into smaller chunks so it's in bite-sized pieces that we can manage. And that for that reason, I'm going to get rid of the sphere as we build tonight, and I'm just going to focus on the sub. And so I'm going to move this to another layer here. So move that to our backup layer. And all I want to focus on is getting the proportions down and getting the sub in a place that is ready for us to move on to combining everything together. So if I jump over to my sculpt tools here, we talked a little bit about this in a previous stream, but one of the things that we have going on here is we left this hole open so that we might be able to combine with a Boolean for that sphere. And now I'm kind of deciding to go a different direction. So we need to close the hole up here. So one of the ways you can do that is if you use the Sculpt Tools add-on here that you can download from Google. If you just Google Sculpt Tools Blender, you'll be able to find this. And what we want to do is create a grease pencil stroke that will kind of define how we're going to cut this mesh. And so you can think of this like if this was a big chunk of clay, we're just taking a knife and slicing the end of it off. And that's kind of what we're going to be doing. So first thing I do is grab the grease pencil menu. I'll jump into a top view here. And I want this to be a really straight cut. So what I'm going to do is grab a line. And I'm going to see if this will work with the mirror modifier turned on. I'm not sure if it will, but we can try it. So once we have a line cut like this, make sure I get this really straight here. Okay, there we go. That's going to be added to a new grease pencil layer. And jump back to the sculpt menu, select the object we want to slice, and then we can use grease cut. Okay, so you can see what that does is it cuts the end of it off. So let's take a look at any of the modifiers that we currently have. We currently don't have any right here, so we can get rid of this. And we want to close this up. So I'm thinking what we need to do is activate these. So I'm going to go ahead, now that we have a really smooth cut there, add a plane. And I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees. Move this over here. And jump into edit mode. And I just want to kind of get this in the proper scale here. And we just want to create a basic object that we can use to kind of merge this up on the end here. So I'm going to add a little subsurf modifier right there, split it down the middle. Throw a mirror modifier on this. Okay. And we can go ahead and delete the bottom half as well. Mirror across the X and Y axes. And so this is actually duplicating it across and down at the same time. And now we're just going to start lining this up a little bit better. Okay, just want to get it kind of close here. And we'll go ahead and apply the mirror. And then down here, it's a little wobbly from top to bottom, so it's not going to be perfectly symmetrical. So we're going to have to play with this a little bit. Okay. And I want to add a edge split. Doesn't look like that's going to do what I want. So instead, I'm going to just add a loop cut on that side so we can get a pretty sharp corner there. And now what we can do if we select both of these is these options will be available now. And so we can hit union, and that will combine those meshes together for us. So now this is all one continuous piece of geometry, as you can see here. Okay. And I wouldn't recommend getting into edit mode that often if you've been sculpting with dynamic topology, because you can see how many points we're dealing with here. It's very messy, and yeah, not fun to sort of mess with there. But so that's one way you can handle that. There is a way to cut this and have it cap the end of it, but I'm forgetting what I need to do at the current moment to kind of make that work. So one of the things we might do at this point, since we've got multiple areas that are different, you know, resolutions here, is we can try remeshing. So I may want to turn this up a little bit and try this. And that will basically just unify the density of the polygons over the entire mesh. So sometimes if you've been sculpting and there's wildly different areas of resolution and you just want to simplify things, that's a good way to do it. Get you back on the same page. And yeah, you can see what that did. Kind of clean things up a little bit for us. So now let's jump into sculpt mode and let's play a little bit with what we have. Grab my Wacom pen here. Make sure I've got my settings kind of where I want them. Okay, so I think we're good to go. First thing I'm going to do is work on smoothing a little bit. I'm going to turn this up. So I'm just holding shift right now, and that's going to kind of help us seamlessly blend the cap that we just put on the end of this mesh. See, we get a little bit of weird things happening here, so we'll have to get in there and kind of see what's going on. The rest of this looks like it's worked out pretty good. Okay, so we'll see if there's a hole or something here. Can't really tell right now. All right, so I'm gonna turn my smooth way up just for right now, so I can see if I can get this smoothed out a little bit more. Okay, so nothing I'm really doing right there is helping, and I don't want to keep just trying to massage that away because it's gonna kind of destroy the rest of the mesh. So in this particular case, we can try to jump into edit mode and see if there's a way to move this little area around. Looks like the culprits are just a few rogue edges here. So what we might do is grab, hit B for box select. We'll grab the whole front section here, and we're just gonna hide it with H. And all that does is kind of open up the mesh really quickly. Now nothing's been disconnected, it's just hidden from view right now. So as soon as we unhide with Alt-H, all of that comes back. So now we can get in here and kind of see what's going on. And we do indeed have a few holes kind of right here that I don't really want to be in place there. So what I'm gonna do is just go ahead and kind of select some of these points here, and might grab the end. And what I'm doing here is selecting a couple of vertices, and I just want to grow from this point outwards and connect the selection. So I'm going to use Control plus on the numpad to grow the selection by vertice here, and then I'm just going to get rid of this stuff with delete. I'll do the same thing on this side, so we grow back this way. Control plus, and I just want to go far enough that I'm kind of back to where we've got a nice clean hole that we can sew up. So I'm going to delete that. Delete this. Okay. And as soon as I'm back to an area that I feel like I can work with, then we can start, kind of tying up these loose ends and playing from there. So I can just keep joining this up with the F2 modifier or F2 add-on that's allowing me to sort of create these faces using just the F command over and over again. And let's go ahead and just quickly see about joining this stuff up here. And it doesn't have to be pretty because we're going to end up retopologizing whatever we do. So just want to get it back to quads here to kind of get started. And then once we do that, we can unhide the rest of this stuff. And now we switch back into sculpt mode. Hopefully we can fix it with just a couple of swipes there of the smooth, like we just did. So I'm going to turn this back down here. So a little bit more of a ginger touch on the tablet, so we're not going to smooth away every edge here. And as soon as we turn back on the dynamic topology later on, that will be kind of, remeshed, so to speak. So that will resolve any of the weird pinching or anything like that that's going on there. So there we go. Okay, now we're back to a clean mesh. Okay, so I'm going to pull up my reference in Photoshop. Let's put this on the other monitor. And I want to make sure that I'm kind of nailing the proportions here for this ship. So I'm going to turn off all of my layers here except for the ship. So I don't want the stem or the octopus or any of that stuff showing. I just want the ship by itself right here. Okay. So that was what I'll be looking at as we sort of mess with the shape here. And remember we talked about last night, we want to nail down big shapes first. And so anything related to the silhouette or the dimensions of, front to end, we want to work on that stuff first because otherwise we're going to run into some problems. So one of the things we can do is grab the snake hook since we're going to need to pull this out this way. We've definitely got with this crook happening down here and coming over. I'd say our big round porthole or whatever window is going to be right here. We need this section to come back over towards where this blue line is. And so what I want to do is grab this whole thing, this front end, and pull it over to here. So we're going to try to use a snake hook here. And so that is doing what we need it to do, but it's not grabbing all of it. So maybe if we start from the middle, we'll get some better results here. Okay, still not getting all of it. So I'm going to make my brush even bigger. Pull out from here. And the bigger you make your brush, the slower things will go. We're also getting some stretching happening right here. And so to avoid that, I'm going to use the mask tool. So we only grab the front section here. So we're going to keep front faces off. So we are adding pretty much everything that we're painting on to this mask, hopefully. And we want to stretch all the way back to about here, maybe. Make sure that we get all of this painted in. And remember that we have everything symmetrically mirroring. So as I paint this, I only really have to paint half of it. And the dark area here is actually everything that's unselected. So we need to invert this mask so that we're only grabbing the front section. So I'm gonna hit Control-I on the keyboard to invert that mask. And if you wanna know where that command is, basically if you jump down to this mask menu, you can see the invert mask there. Fill mask doesn't actually have a command, but if you select this, it'll basically paint bucket the entire mesh and fill that in with the mask. Clear mask, box mask, lasso, and a whole bunch of other cool commands. So not every command has a keyboard shortcut, so sometimes you need to go looking and see what you can find. But yeah, so you can actually control most of what you see here through these menus down at the bottom. So the symmetry is over here and all that sort of stuff. Fast navigate is actually something that's pretty useful. So if you find that your viewport is chugging when you have a lot of polygons that you're sculpting, check off fast navigate and it will sort of speed things up as you're moving around. And yeah, so you can already see we've got quite a dense mesh happening here. So let's jump back to our snake hook command. And if we're not getting what we need from this, we can use the grab command, and that will also help. Okay. So question in the chat, Lauren's asking if we can assign keyboard shortcuts to the commands that don't have them, and the answer is yes, you can. If you go to the user preferences, you can go to input here, and then Blender, the current keyboard layout is selected right here. You can create your own. And then you can search keyboard shortcuts by the name of the command or the actual keyboard shortcut and filter here. And then each of the sections of Blender has a little drop-in. So if you're looking for something in the 3D viewports, you need to go to 3D view. And then inside of this, you've got, so sculpt is what we're using right now. And so all of these are the keyboard shortcuts that have already been assigned. And all you have to do to change one of these is just left click here. It'll ask you for a new keyboard shortcut and then press a key and you just press it and it will assign a new one. So you gotta kind of be careful in here because you don't wanna get in here and mess up all of the existing keyboard shortcuts, but you can add new ones right here. And all you have to do is select the proper type of shortcut you want to use. You can do mouse shortcuts, any sort of those, assign it here, and then this would be the name of where you get the actual command from. So you actually need to find the name of the command you want to do, and it's pretty easy if you're in a menu. All you have to do is jump down here, and so if we find one that doesn't have one, like hide masked, we can actually right click and just click add shortcut, and then it's going to ask you to press a key, and it's the exact same sort of thing that you would find in the menu I was just showing you. And then next time you go in there, it will ask you for that. So yeah, that's how you do that. So let's try grab with the dynamic topology turned on instead of the snake hook, because it's still going to add geometry, but it may work a little better for us. It's definitely a little faster. So we can pull that out there. Might lower the size of this a little bit. Okay, back a little too far. Just kind of squishing that together. Okay, that's a little better. And I think this is going to be pretty much ballpark good enough. Get this over here if I can. So we can go a little further than that line over there, and then work our way to flattening this back out. So I'm gonna raise this a little bit. Let's kind of move this over piece by piece. There we go. So now that we've got this a little bit past where we need it, shouldn't be that hard to flatten this back down. So we can switch to a view that's sort of straight on. And yeah, why not? We'll keep that on. pick a resolution that's already sitting here, and then we'll just flatten this up. Now it's going to be kind of hard to tell from this view how flat we're getting. So once we get an initial stroke, we can just rotate around and kind of see where we're at. You see we want to get back to that green line. And so I'm just going to look for areas that are further out and kind of eyeball this a little bit. Little by little, we'll get this smoothed back down to a flattened state. So this isn't turned up very high. It's at a 0.3 right now out of a 1.0. But you can kind of see what that's doing. And if we need to kind of add a little bit back on those edges, we just grab this and fill that in so that the rim is kind of evened out. Good question. Lauren's asking, am I using my mouse for navigating and my tablet for sculpting? So yes, I am using both. You don't have to. You can actually assign the navigation key, the middle mouse button, to your tablet pen. And so if I actually click one of these, so this is one of my buttons on the side of my pen here, and this is the other one. So this is actually doing something. I don't know what that's doing. But yeah, I can jump into my Wacom preferences and assign a middle mouse button click to one of those buttons and do that. But I'm just using the middle mouse button of my mouse right here, and I'm just clicking it, and then I'm navigating with my pen. So I'm kind of using two hands at the same time. And then when I find a position that I'm kind of settled into, and I'm happy with that view, I put my hand back on the keyboard, my right hand, and my left hand, I'm left-handed, so that's what I'm sketching with. My right hand is kind of on the shift key, so that way once I start sketching or sculpting with clay strips or whatever, at any point in time I can hit shift to smooth or control to kind of dig in, or do the opposite of whatever tool I have selected. So that's, I think, the fastest workflow for me, because I use shift and control as I sculpt the most for keyboard shortcuts. So this is kind of what's handy for this workflow, it seems to me, in Blender. All right, so now we'll hit Alt-M to clear the mask, so we don't need that anymore. And now that we've got this lined out all the way to the side over here, do one more pass with the flatten, and getting close to just calling this good. Okay, I think for now that is probably good enough. Okay, so now let's get back into sculpting the panels that we were working on last night. So I'm going to stick over to this section that we were kind of on, make sure that we're happy with the way these are all headed. So if you remember, we've got these two levels happening right here that correlate to this corner of the front end over here. And one of the things I kind of thought about is that we may want to kind of square this off a little more, where it's a little bit more like that. And then that would mean this one comes out and it's a little bit more like this. So I think I like that a little better. So get a little bit of clay added there and then smooth that away. and then we'll come back later and kind of tighten these lines up. But I think that square profile is a little bit more accurate to kind of what I'm seeing from the concept art. And then I want a little bit of a raised ridge, sort of coming in through here. So we've got a little bit of a horn or something that's kind of raised up right there. And then dropping down into this area, we're gonna have another layer that is got a little bit different depth. So we're gonna subtract from this and use our layer tool for this. Okay. So from the side, you can kind of see what that's doing. And what I'll do is kind of step this down a little bit at a time until I feel like we're in a good place. And then we'll go back and smooth all of that out. Just like that. So you can kind of see how that drops down there. And if we need to add some back, we can come back with this over here. And it might be a little easier to just switch to clay strips and use that. It's a little bit more subtle. Okay. Okay, so we got that kind of blocked in. And the front end of the ship here is kind of cutting down away from us this way. I'm going to leave that kind of the way it is because we need to leave this joined up at the pipe front the correct way. And so this front tip here is going to kind of be sacrificed in this case, just because I think trying to mimic this perfectly is going to be a little tough. You know what? It's all right. We'll figure this out. It's a good learning experience. So if we want to add this in, let's just back this off. And as long as we keep this angle kind of consistent, as far as the way this is working, we won't have to do too much to fix this because that's still a polygonal object. So let's grab this front end right here in sculpt mode and kind of get that angle in there. So I don't think we're gonna need to have quite as big of a brush here. So we'll just pull this end out like this. And I'm mostly concerned with this bottom curve that we're kind of keeping this lined up here. All of this can be pulled out as well. So we'll start here and I can try to pull this out. It might be easier to use inflate in this case to add back that sort of geometry on the end. So yeah, so we can do that and then jump back to our trusty flatten. Okay. So to make the brush bigger and smaller, you can use the left and right bracket keys on the keyboard, or if you want to use F, you can change the size with a variable slider. And once you hit F once, it'll just start moving with your mouse. So to accept that, you can either left click or you can hit escape to back out of whatever you're doing. And F will change the size, which is the radius right here. And then Shift F will change the strength. So change this right here. So if you're trying to adjust these quite often, you might want to learn those shortcuts because they can be useful in the viewport. So I just hit the / on my numpad to jump into local view so we can get that pipe stem out of the way. Now I want to flatten out the very tip of this to even that up with the rest of the sub here. Okay. So there we go. So all we would really need to do is kind of rotate that into place to match this again, and we're good to go. So I'm gonna try to get this front end kind of blocked in the way we want. Just do this quickly with clay strips. Okay, so I'm looking at the reference. We've got that dip going all the way back to here. So I'm following that line. We're gonna need right about the front end of this horn area. We're gonna carve into this, create another dip down here. All of this is gonna go towards the front. And then right here we've got, so right here we've got another layer, and this should actually come out further than this layer here. So it's just about defining those little ridges and seeing where those need to go. This piece here is going to go in. It's going to kind of snake its way down the bottom and pull back and make sure I'm sort of looking at this from the right side. This is where using the smooth stroke might be a good idea, but I'm just going to freehand it for now. These are just kind of guidelines to tell me what my game plan is here. Then there's going to be another line here. The propeller rudder is going to be somewhere in this area. Maybe a little further up, right here. So it's coming down. Connecting up over there. Okay, so got a basic map for how this is kind of looking. We need to define these ridges a little bit better here. Okay, so if this is where the rudder is, make sure we know that's a good reference for a landmark, so we kind of know where we are. So that means the front end, if we're saying it's here, this all needs to be evened out. Yeah. Okay. This is going to be popping out a little more. So you can see what I'm doing. I'm just layering up with multiple strokes of the clay strips tool. Whenever I feel like it's getting a little too messy to make sure that these are on the same layer, I'm smoothing this back down. And I'm not doing is I'm not smoothing it completely away. So if you do that, you're going to be wasting a lot of time building and unbuilding kind of what you're doing. So you just want to lightly stroke this with a smooth, holding shift when you go back and kind of smooth that back out. And that's how you build up those layers. So you can see now we've got some definite folds here from these panels. And it's hard to tell from the sketch because we don't have it sort of shaded in. But it looks like this outside area down here could be further out than even this area. So it's kind of our call at this point. So no, I wasn't actually. The question was, were these ridges on the side of the ship? And I'm assuming you're talking about these little holes. Maybe you're not, but no, none of this was actually thought through that much in terms of the propulsion system. So I didn't get in here a lot and take the time to figure out the mechanics of this because I knew I wasn't going to be animating it. And you know, obviously, the more time you have to mess with that stuff, the more realistic it's going to come across. But this is since this was just sort of a set piece for something else we already had going on. I didn't think it really warranted the time to think all that through the way you would if it was going to be used in, you know, a game or something that was going to feature it as, you know, a hero prop for the project. But yes, ideally speaking, if you have the time, you should definitely devote it to that sort of stuff. Okay. Okay, so let's take a look. Make sure our profile's still there. Sometimes it's good to zoom back and do that because you can accidentally make a big mistake and not catch it in time, and then it's so far back, there's no way to undo it. You're gonna have to go back out there and kind of unsculpt it. So if you are making big swift changes like this, just zoom out every now and then and make sure you're paying attention. Okay. This is sort of here to remind me that there needs to be a ridge. And what's great about this is if we get to a point where it's looking sort of halfway decent, we don't really have to worry about it anymore. This is kind of where we get into talking about not being a slave to your design. And especially if it's your project, if it looks good after a certain point, then my advice would be to just let it go and stop messing with it. Because the more you try to spend time perfecting things, you know, as a general rule, you should set a goal for yourself and then go after it. And once you achieve it, you know, 80% is good enough. 80% is better than nothing. So, especially while you're learning, if you're further along and you're trying to, you know, sort of set out your portfolio, then that's not advice you want to follow. But if you're just trying to learn the ropes, you know, don't beat yourself up over not being able to do all this stuff the first time you try it, because this took me years to get comfortable doing. And you know, a lot of this is just a test of your eye in terms of being able to see the shapes and determine based on proportions and measuring and all that sort of stuff if you're in the right place. And if you're not, then it'll be obvious. It'll feel off, and you may not always be able to tell why, but it will feel off. Okay, so That was a little far out for me, so I'm just smoothing that back down a little bit. Okay, so instead of zooming in and working, we're gonna stay zoomed out and we're gonna keep flowing with the shape here. Brush is a little small. I want to start working big again, so big strokes. Slow and steady wins the race, and don't get impatient. Okay, so I'm going to ignore the window that's right here right now, and we're just going to pretend like it's not there and keep sculpting these panels in, because we're going to go back and add the window on top of everything later. Same thing for these big shapes that are added on. Those can actually be sculpted or modeled after the fact, just like the octopus, and added back in. Okay. So bulk this area out a little bit. This area even more so. You'll notice my strokes are all running kind of in the same direction, and for this model that's going to be good because it's a little easier to smooth out from left to right along the length. So goal is to continue the same depth from here all the way down and try to maintain one consistent, smooth sort of area. You don't always have to use clay strips. I use it a lot because I feel like it's easy to get clay in and out fast. Inflate is also a really good tool to kind of do what we're doing now. And I want to turn this down a little bit so it can get a little heavy-handed. But this just basically pushes out and puffs out the geometry. And like I said, in this particular case, it will do a lot of what we're looking for. So you can see the shadowing here kind of clearing up, and we're not getting as much pitting and stuff down towards the bottom. And that's telling me that we're smoothing and leveling out a lot of these areas. So we're still getting some dip like right in here, and it's a little too much. So again, we need to figure out what section is causing that and then kind of fatten that out. I can tell that that's going in because there's a shadow on the upper portion and a highlight on the bottom, and that's telling me that the light is catching from above here. So I know I need to add material, and here there isn't a highlight, which means we've got this in the same sort of flat area, or it's at least approaching that. And that's why matte caps are so good to use, because they do a lot more for helping you catch those little mistakes and changes in the form as you sculpt than just the default lighting in Blender. Okay. So at this point, let's grab crease. Turn on smooth stroke. Start here and then just pull this down all the way to the end. And if we want to kind of delay how far out that's going, we can turn this up. And then when we start pulling, it'll wait until we're further along before it starts dragging behind. Like that. Okay, so it's getting a little puffy down here at the bottom in terms of the wobbliness. I'm going to flatten that just slightly. It's a little too much. Let's undo that. Turn this way down. So Lauren Davies asking, did I say matte caps? And I did say matte caps, and I'll show you what those are in just a second. This is something that you would only typically use while you're sculpting. It's not something you're going to find useful for a lot of other purposes, but they are very useful indeed for sculpting things. So making sure to rotate as we move around with this flatten tool, so we're not just creating big flat areas. But see right here, we get a little bit of a hump wobble right there. This is where we can grab that inflate. Really quickly, just kind of pull those in a little bit there. Jump back to flatten, and then just brush away. Still an issue. So if inflate doesn't work, clay strips definitely will. Before I smooth, I want to check and make sure I'm adding clay to the right area. Okay, so now we got those areas filled in. Let's flatten. And lightly smooth. Hold shift, and I'm just barely touching the tablet. And that's how you flatten that, those little humps right there. Or at least one way you can do it. Okay, let's talk about matte caps. So I'm gonna hit N to bring up my properties panel on the right side here. And if you scroll down to the bottom, you're gonna see this checkbox called matte cap. So typically this is off, but if you check this little box, it's going to turn your model a different color, and it'll show you a preview of a material right here. And so basically all these are little image files that are saved with Blender, and 2.8 will actually let you create custom matte caps. So that's going to be a cool new feature that's coming up soon. But what these do is they assign a material to your object in your 3D viewport that you're sculpting, and they let you kind of see effects of lighting and reflections on the model. And these are not accurate, you know, they're not based on any sort of real lighting. Basically, it's just quickly getting a preview of what it might look like in a simulated environment. And it's all based on computing what the light would look like on your sculpted object based on what this image looks like. And so if you left click and kind of scroll through here, you can select any one of these matte caps and they'll show you what this material would look like for your object. And so it gives you a variety of lighting scenarios. The ones at the top are most useful for like sculpting, because you can really start to see highlights and reflections and stuff like that. So this one's a good one. This one's most like the one you're gonna find in ZBrush. So I like to use this one a lot because I'm used to looking at it. But then you've got some other effects here that are useful for some different applications. So if you happen to be working on something that's metallic, you have some metallic options that make this sort of look like it's made out of silver or gold, and gives you some reflections to work with. So these are soft reflections. So it kind of looks like aluminum foil now. And then you've got really shiny matte caps down here. So this actually sort of looks like silver. So when I was doing the spoon and sculpting that, this kind of gave me a really quick preview of what that would look like with the little surface. And what this does is basically not only shows you kind of a preview, but it gives you an idea of where all the little bumps and divots and things are in your model, because it's really hard to kind of tell sometimes what areas need to be smoothed out when you start getting into really minute details. And this is important to figure out, because when it comes time to move past a sculpt stage, you're kind of past the point of no return in terms of going backwards and sculpting and then re-topologizing and then, you know, re-baking and all that sort of stuff. So you need to be able to preview a little bit of what you're doing with the material before you actually assign materials to it. These are kind of like car paint. So when I was actually modeling the car for one of my courses, these came in handy to kind of give me a really quick preview of what that would look like. On a smooth surface, this is what it looks like. So you can imagine how on a car, if you've got any sort of problems with your topology in terms of the hood and things like that on the car body, this is going to show you immediately if you've got a problem, because the reflections aren't going to be smooth. You're going to have crazy wobbly sort of things like you're having over here. And by the time we're done, we'll have smoothed this out. It'll be nice and shiny and all of that. This is a special one you can use for quickly getting normal maps generated. And so that's kind of a specialized one that you can use for specific purposes. And then there's all sorts of like funny ones, but I'm not entirely sure what the usefulness of these are, but maybe if you want to do some cool previews for screenshots for your web or whatever. This one's bubbles. This one's kind of useful for silhouettes if you just want to preview what it's going to look like from the outside, things like that. So that's kind of what I'll say about matte caps. This one's kind of a nice clay one too. It's a little bit more shiny. Bubble gum. And yeah, so some of these are pretty useful. Some of them, I don't know. But yeah, that's what a matte cap is. Okay. So we got this bottom area really well defined. Before we move on, I'm gonna really quickly pinch this up on the bottom. Got smooth stroke turned on. So Control-7 will show me the bottom of the mesh and line me up. And I'm gonna start right here and just pull straight down the middle to the right to crease this up. So one continuous smooth stroke, and it gives me that little peak at the bottom of my boat. And if I line this up correctly with the symmetry turned on, I shouldn't see two lines. I should just see one continuous one down the middle. And that just gives me a little indication that that's there, and we'll definitely come back later and make that more pronounced. Okay, so I want to differentiate these two sections here because they're definitely not kind of working for me right now. I think we have room to kind of carve in a little bit here rather than pulling this one out even further. So we might, for this front section, even this out, and then here we'll go the opposite direction with Control. Carve in, be a little bit more ginger around the top, so we're not going to get rid of that sort of crest right there. Okay. Now this needs to actually drop down pretty sharply. Come across this way. So dropping the size of this tool kind of lets me define that ridge. And then as soon as I got that in there, I